What is up, y'all? Welcome back to finally another podcast episode, y'all. I apologize for the wait, especially to all my friends who have been asking me when the next podcast is going to be. Just things were happening, time with friends, family, other things as well. And next to that, I also have, when it comes to these podcast episodes, y'all, I can't just, do them all willy-nilly. I have to plan out the podcast episode. I gotta think what I'm gonna say during the podcast episode, what I can talk about. But anyway, I'm back and I'm really glad because, as you guys know, it is now 2025. I'm recording this podcast and my mom was completing the second week, and y'all, I have several resolutions that I'm going to fulfill in 2025. Some of these were 2024, so you could say I'm partially done with one resolution, but this is kind of the part two, just like in the title of this episode. But we'll get down to that episode in a minute. But first, I'm gonna give a few disclaimers. The first disclaimer, y'all, please know. Actually, no, let me try that again. There we go. Now, our first disclaimer, please keep all negative comments or judgment off the podcast. We want everyone to have their own opinions, but the point of this podcast is to give people the opportunity and encouragement to let them say what they want to say if they have a special gem like me. One more disclaimer, please note this is not in any way a way to disrespect anyone in the force, as I'm a very supporter of the force as well. We thank you for your service. The point of this is to give people kind of an example of what they need to look for when it comes to people with autism and how to cope if they see anyone having a certain reaction the way an autism person reacts. Thank you. And with that, let's go and get started. So welcome to another podcast episode of Autism Talk with Lil Clay Clay with me, your host, Lil Clay Clay. So first, let's go ahead and start with a moment of prayer like we normally do. Dear Lord, I pray over this podcast. I thank you that you finally have helped me create a new episode. I pray for everyone that's watching that if they're trying to find you, Lord, they can find you through this podcast, Lord. And I also pray that people get the message, since the point of this episode is to kind of make it clear something that a lot of people with autism, Down syndrome, or whatever want to be made clear, and I've wanted it to be made clear for years, that we do not want to be walked over with eggshells. Lord, please let this podcast episode open their eyes and help people realize that. Lord, in your name we pray, amen. Alright, so as you know, as you can tell by the title, if you're looking down while watching the video version or the audio version, this is Autism Gets Arrested Part 2. And today we're going to be kind of talking about basically two incidents involving people with autism and the police. The first one is about, I just recently found out last year. Both of these are actually, this was the first one, and it's about her son, this woman and her son who was in school until his mother was called and found out that her son had been detained by police and then locked into just a room. And I had seen the TikTok video for myself. That's how I found out. And the poor kid was just laying on the ground. He looked scared, telling his mom how he snapped. There was hardly any light in the room, just a couple lights. Looked like some kind of maybe rec room or whatever. And at first, the mother had stated that the police refused to let him out or let her see him until she had threatened to call the chief of police. And that was when he was finally given to his mother. And this is where all that did not make sense. And by that I mean the fact that he was put into that room, because she had stated, I can't remember fully what she stated, y'all, but she said that he had been told, the teachers were made aware that he was autistic, and that under normal, there have been several times where all he would have to do if he needed to go out and cool off, he was more than welcome to do it in the hallway. And she had stated that, and according to her, that was what he had tried to do originally before being restrained by the police and put into that room. And when I saw this video, I was like, it really brought back memories, because I remember going to this very jacked up middle school that little did I know I was put in there for a reason, as you'll hear in my testimony, because I do plan to give my testimony on YouTube. If you want to check out my YouTube channel, Little Click Vlogs. But anyway, it brought back to when I had witnessed something similar to this firsthand when I was in a special needs program at a middle school I went to. It was during health class, and one of the kids, who I'm pretty sure was autistic, he was having a bit of a moment. He didn't have a full-on meltdown like most people with autism would. I know that for a fact because I've had my share of meltdowns. But anyway, it was because he wanted to go and sit with another kid who was in the autism program, and obviously everything went normal. The chaperone told him no, he couldn't do that, but then she ended up, after telling him that if he didn't stop, she would need to take him to the police, because apparently that was her only option. And he even stated that she was taking him to the police over things that weren't even against the law, and they weren't. And I already had enough of this woman, because she really wasn't even a fully part of the program. She was just someone who would just come and go. And she had gotten on my nerves plenty. But next to that, I really do thank God for letting me witness that, because since then, like, as years went by and I remember thinking about that, I promised myself that I would one day put a stop to it. I would one day let people know that they don't have to live in fear that if they have a breakdown and they're autistic, they don't have to worry about somebody doing something that they shouldn't do in order to stop them. But anyway, back to the episode. This was not the only time that police were involved. In fact, there were much more worse times here. Particularly in this next case I'm about to read to you guys, actually. But first, let me go ahead and do the Bible verse I was going to read to you guys, because it's been a while since I did a podcast episode. I'm kind of a little disorganized here, so let me read you guys the verse real quick. Let me find it on my trusty iPad mini here. And also, I guess while I'm waiting, y'all, please bear with me on the audio. The little mic on my AirPod, on my little earbuds that I use, I couldn't find them, and it's late at night while I'm recording this, so I can only use what I can, so just bear with me. I am going to try and invest in some new mics that are USB-C, so I can plug them into my iPad. I was going to invest in a computer instead, Mac Mini, but I think this is more important. Let's see here. Where is it? Here we go. Luke chapter 22, verses 63 through 65. The guards in charge of Jesus began mocking him and beating him. They blindfolded him and said, "Prophesy to us. Who hit you? Who hit you that time?" And they hurled all sorts of insults at him. The reason I chose this verse is because this kind of relates. This is kind of one of the things that happens when some of these incidents happen with people with autism. We're mocked, we're called babies, thinking that we're told that we have demons in us, and I know that's not true. I don't believe any of my mental breakdowns or anytime I see an autistic person have a breakdown has anything to do with any demonic activity. Yes, obviously we are mocked by the enemy, but that is about it, because I myself have witnessed demonic behavior myself at my church. I'm not really going to get into all that, but back to the story now that I've got the story pulled up. So this next one is about 19-year-old Isaiah Trammell. And he was arrested and incarcerated in jail. This kind of comes from the disclaimer I said earlier. But while unfortunately he was incarcerated, he died due to head injuries. Despite being seen by many multiple prison staff, banging his head against the concrete wall. And to give people kind of an understanding, we autistes have a bit of a pain tolerance. For example, to me, if someone was to drop maybe like a small little paperweight on my foot, to me it would just basically like if someone were to just step on my foot by accident. But anyway, inside the Montgomery County Jail, guards taunted, belittled, and threatened Isaiah Trammell, a 19-year-old who had autism spectrum disorder. Deputies on the overnight shift told Trammell he was ridiculous, embarrassing, and acting like a... I can't say that last part because this is kind of a family-friendly podcast. As surveillance videos show. Officers strapped Trammell in a restraint chair two separate times and threatened more time in the chair if he didn't calm down. Activists called for investigation of Montgomery County Jail after newspaper special report the death of Isaiah Trammell. Trammell couldn't calm himself. He banged his head on the cell door, howled, and repeatedly screamed, "Let me out." Head banging or other self-injury behaviors are more prevalent among people with autism. For Trammell, it was a dangerous coping mechanism that he continued during this brief time in jail. That also was another fact, because during a few breakdowns that I've had that I've done better at controlling, there's been a couple times where I've banged my head against the wall, maybe banged it against my bed. I even tried to punch a hole in the wall in my bedroom when I got upset about something. But I've learned to control it, and I've had people who love me, and sometimes they'll even be like, "Hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?" This, unfortunately, was not for Isaiah Trammell. You remember how that restraint chair felt? Remember what that surgeon said? "You're going to go in for 10 hours next time you go in there. You want to do that?" One officer told Trammell hours after he had been released from the chair for the first time. One officer said they couldn't use the restraint chair, prompting another to respond, "Just put the chair in front of his expletive cell so he stops. Give him a constant reminder." The restraint chair is supposed to be a last resort, only used in extreme circumstances, and when the safety of the incarcerated person or others is in danger. Staff are supposed to use other interventions first, such as offering medication. Trammell begged for his medications, a phone call, and a blanket. No one heeded his pleas. Less than 10 hours after entering jail, Dayton paramedics loaded Trammell into an ambulance. He died 3 days later. The coroner ruled it a suicide, a ruling Trammell's mother once changed. Montgomery County Sheriff Rob Streck said Trammell shouldn't have been in jail given his mental health issues. Trammell's case isn't an outlier. A USA Today Network Ohio investigation found out that most of the 600 people in Ohio jails each day suffer from mental illness. This next part, neighbor's call led to his arrest. This is the part that really got me, because this is what I mean by I want people with autism to one day be able to, if they have a moment, to have a moment without having to worry about people around them looking at them and seeing them as a monster. Trammell was proud that he had his own place at 19, said his mother, Brandy Abner. It was his first time living by himself. It was close to his job at Walmart and near his grandmother's home. One night inside his Lebanon apartment, Trammell grew anxious about a job interview scheduled for the next day. He raged, yelling on the phone with his uncle, banging his head as a coping mechanism. In previous rages, his family called for help, and Trammell stayed in the hospital for a few days. This time, his neighbor called the cops. Lebanon police officers arrived at his apartment around 12:30 a.m. on March 13, 2023. While checking on Trammell, police found an outstanding warrant for his arrest. Neither Trammell or his family knew the warrant existed. It was a misdemeanor domestic violence warrant from an incident a year before. Abner said Trammell was raging, and her sister and her husband called the police. "Like we always call when he begins to rage," Abner said. "It's a mental health call. It's not an arrest me call." Now I'm gonna hit the pause button real quick and just give a bit of advice. Please don't call the police. If you're trying to help somebody with autism, call somebody else. Call maybe a church pastor, a friend that he knows he can talk to if the person with autism has something that they need, that they're trying to cope with. Do not use the police. It is not what the police are for, and police officers aren't necessarily trained to deal with people with autism or anyone with a special gem. Abner picked up her son from Miami Valley Hospital after that incident. She said a nurse told her that the police hadn't left any paperwork, so everything must be okay. Abner said she double-checked by calling the courthouse the next day and was told there was nothing on Trammell. He applied for 2 jobs after the incident without anyone mentioning a warrant. Instead of taking Trammell to a hospital in March 2023, Lebanon police officers transferred Trammell into the custody of Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies. They decided to take him to jail, where the conditions would hit on nearly every trigger he had until he was unable to calm down. Officers booked Trammell in jail around 1 a.m. He told the jail's medical staff he had ADHD and autism and said, "I don't want to live." Jailers put Trammell on suicide watch. In Ohio, that means you are supposed to be strip searched, given a suicide-resistant gown, blanket, and mattress, and put in a safe cell by yourself. Officers gave Trammell the gown, but not a blanket or the mattress. He hated his body to be exposed and kept telling them he hated to be confined. Absolutely, that would trigger him, Abner said of her son. Trammell started banging his head in jail before he was booked and continued banging throughout the night. Head banging was one of Trammell's stems, the self-soothing behaviors people with autism turn to, such as flapping their hands or rocking. A couple things that I've actually done as well, sometimes even while I'm talking to God. Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability that affects an estimated 2% of adults in the U.S. Symptoms can include hypersensitivity to lights and sounds, repetitive behaviors, and difficulties with social cues. Everybody knows that somebody's autistic, Abner says. People with autism can struggle with shouting, chaos, and disruptions in a jail. They can be slow to respond to their name or verbal requests and unable to predict or understand other people's actions, which law enforcement officers may interpret as resistance. When Trammell banged his head as a kid, his mother would wrap her arms around him and try to put something between him and any hard surfaces. The more they try to control this stuff, the more irritated they get, Abner said. Trammell told deputies headbanging was the only way I know to get rid of the crazy in my head. Clearly, this was the enemy's doing, but unfortunately, nobody's eyes were open enough because they were too blinded by the enemy to notice this. At 4:15 a.m., officers said Trammell banged his head against his cell window so forcefully that his forehead began to swell. Guards decided to put him in a restraint chair for the first time, strapping down his chest, wrists, and ankles for his own protection from self-harm. Trammell, like many people with autism, hated to be restricted. His mother said he hated even being in a car seat when he was little. Trammell calmed down after 1 hour in the restraint chair and told an officer that he had no intention of harming himself, according to the investigation report. Deputies kept Trammell in the chair for another hour, which is against Ohio standards for restraints. Officers released Trammell and returned him to his cell, where he paced and banged on the door with his fist. After nearly 3 hours, Trammell asked the surgeon for a mat, blanket, and a phone call. The sergeant refused. Half an hour later, Trammell went to video court and learned he would not get out of jail anytime soon. He spiraled out of control. The security camera mounted in the corner of the holding cell captured Trammell, pacing, rocking, and kicking and crying. "Let me out," he shouted over and over. A nurse came over to speak with him, but when Trammell continued shouting, she said, "Okay, I'm done," and walked away. "Please, I'm in pain," Trammell screamed and asked repeatedly to call his family. Guards watched as he banged his head against the cell door and collapsed on the floor. Deputies started walking towards Trammell's cell as he screamed, "No, please no. You should have thought, bro. Turn around. I said so." "Turn around, lay on your stomach," a deputy said to him from the other side of the cell door. Inside, Trammell flopped onto the concrete floor. Then he leaped and slammed the right side of his head, 4 rapid blows against the cinder block wall, knocking himself out for a few seconds. Trammell, who hated to be touched by strangers, found himself pinned face down on the ground by 5 officers. An officer pinned him back into the restraint chair with his knee as the others strapped him in again. "Please, let's talk about this," Trammell cried. A deputy told him, "No, there's no talking." Trammell asked for his clothes and a phone call. He asked the deputies to listen to him and how long he would be in the restraint chair. Ohio policy states jail staff should never use restraints for punishment or the staff's convenience. Staff should calmly explain what they're doing and why. Deputies repeatedly told Trammell to cooperate or they would force him to. "Please, please, please, I'm shaking. Please, I'm in pain. Please, 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 I'm shaking," Trammell pleaded as they photographed a golf ball sized lump on his forehead. "Please, I'm in pain." Now, this most likely results to one thing we autistics have, which is a pain tolerance. I should know because I've had several events where my pain tolerance has been put into place and has also sometimes gotten the best of me. Kind of right now because I had this swollen headache. Oh my gosh, and then I got this crick in the back of my neck that I'm trying to get rid of. Abner said she had never seen her son look as afraid as he did in the surveillance video. Deputies wheeled Trammell strapped to the chair and into a separate cell. He banged his head against the back of the restraint chair and continued screaming and tensing. Even once he quieted, Trammell sucked air in and out of his lungs so loudly it could be heard in the surveillance camera. "You can see his pupils were two different sizes. They should have known that something bad was going to happen," Abner said. Trammell was unconscious by the time he was taken to the hospital. He died 3 days later, leaving behind his parents, 6 siblings, and his dog Bruce. His mother didn't know Trammell had been in jail until he was in the hospital. Appropriate care. Teresa Russell, Director of Criminal Justice Outreach for the Sheriff's Office, said all jail staff and contract employees go through very stringent training focused on recognizing the signs of symptoms of specific mental health diagnosis and developmental disabilities. Strick, the county sheriff said, everything seemed fine when Trammell first came into the jail. He began banging once again. I don't like being on the record for this because my attorneys don't want. But as soon as he started banging his head, he was taken, secured, calmed down, let out, and put back in his cell with people watching him. Strick said, and out of the blue, he does the same thing. He added all that happened within seconds. So staff was there. Staff quickly figured out that he had an issue. There's a lot more, but I'm going to go ahead and stop here because most of it's just about kind of like what happened basically after he passed away, like what's been going on since then. But I would like to personally give a shout out to Isaiah Trammell's family, and I want them to know that he was loved by somebody and is the person that created him and made him that special with that special gem. But anyway, guys, this is what needs to be done, in my opinion. I've seen several other news videos of kids with autism getting arrested or other people with autism getting arrested. There was one adult who was tasered onto the ground by police officers. Another story involving another person who had just run out of his group home who was also autistic and was arrested as well and was then most likely placed in another group home. You guys have known how many times I pray to God if I have a breakdown while I'm out in public that nobody sees it and calls the police, because that makes the anxiety worse even more. If you are autistic and you have people that you know you can go to, or people who know that you have breakdowns and ask you, are you okay? Are you sure? Take that opportunity. Don't take it for granted because you may not realize this is someone you can come to all the time. The more you don't see it, the more you're going to take it for granted. And when you do, when the person does want to help you, it's too late. This is one of the many things we say or mean when we say we do not want to be walked upon by people with eggshells. And this is why, because a lot of times this is people's first solution. And it breaks my heart. My advice to anyone, if they see someone with autism having a breakdown, talk to them. Give them some space. Don't call the police. If you see somebody calling the police, Tell them no, let's give them some time to cool off. Try to get with the situation. Don't let the enemy blind you. Don't let him blind you from one of the many things that Jesus taught us, which is giving grace. Anyway, y'all, that pretty much ends this podcast. There will probably be more episodes just like this. But one thing I would like to start doing is, once I get some new equipment, definitely start doing interviews. And I actually would like, just like I do with my brother, and I'm hoping to actually do an interview with my mom and her friends. So if they're watching this, you guys get ready, because you guys are about to be the next guest stars in this podcast. For anyone who doesn't know, my mother has MS, and I don't really know much about MS, but the point of this podcast is to also talk about other special gems, as well as I call them. So anyway, with that being said, y'all, I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you are listening from the audio, please don't hesitate to hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any episodes. And while you're at it, maybe check on any previous episodes and let me know if you like them in the review section. If you're watching this from the video version, please do not hesitate to hit that like, comment, and subscribe button so you guys will not miss out on any episodes of this podcast. And with that, y'all, this is your boy Lil Clay signing out. I'll see you in the next podcast. Love y'all. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed that podcast. I just wanted to give a brief message. So when you watch this podcast, y'all, you are not only giving support to me, but other people with autism, Down syndrome, and any other type of special gem in the world. The point of this podcast is to let them know that they can be whatever they want to be, and to also give people a better understanding with autism. I advise you all to share this podcast and the podcast episodes as well, so we can reach out to as many people as possible. Thank you so much for watching this podcast. Now go and follow God.